What's up, everybody? My name is Steve Hoggart. I'm the pastor of Hickory Hill Baptist Church. Glad you can watching this video because we're going to look over our Sunday school lesson, which would be for April the 19th, Sunday, April the 19th. We are having church, but we're doing something a little different. We're having parking lot church, and I'll give you more details at the end of this video. So we're in Romans 8. Now, Paul starts out in Romans 8. He is talking about life through the Spirit of God. In verses 5 through 8, Paul says those who live in the sinful nature have their mind set on that nature. In the same way, and those who live toward the Spirit have their mind set toward the spiritual. In other words, Paul is saying if you live in the sinful nature, you are feeding that nature, the sinful nature. And if your mind is set toward the Spirit, you're feeding that nature. So then he goes and says three things. He says the sinful nature is hostile to God. It cannot submit to God. And the sinful nature cannot please God. And Paul continues about the Spirit versus the sinful nature. And he slides these thoughts into our Sunday school lesson, which is Romans 8:12 through verse 25. Again, I want to walk through this. I expect you to read this and kind of look over it. So if you want to pause the video, pause the video. But again, please read it. It'll make more sense as you read it. But I'm just going to tell you the verse and kind of explain it kind of quickly to save on time. So in verse 12, Paul says, therefore, Paul is summing up his thoughts about the Spirit versus the sinful nature. And Paul says that you have an obligation. And the word obligation means you owe someone. You have a debt, and you have to repay that debt. Paul says that believers have an obligation, and that obligation is not toward the sinful nature. In other words, you fools, why in the world would you continue in the sinful nature? Because it owes you nothing. You owe nothing to the sinful nature. Why would you do that? Why would you spend your time and money and energy to the sinful nature? In the end, it will cost you. In fact, in verse 13, it says the sinful nature will cost you death. You will die by living in that nature. But by living by the Spirit, you put to death the deeds of the sinful nature, Paul says. So let me sum up here. He says if you are a believer, you're obligated to the Spirit. The Spirit puts the sinful deeds to death. Now here's some homework. Just kind of think about it. Spend some time in thinking about why are you obligated to the Spirit. Just spend some time. Write some things down. I'll give you some ideas as we go through this. All right, in verse 14 and 15. One reason you're obligated to follow the Spirit is because it makes you a child of God. It indicates that you are a son or daughter of God. The Spirit does not make you a slave to fear anymore, but a child. That a child of God, because you are that child, you have intimacy with God. That you can crawl up into God's lap and call him Daddy, Abba, the Father. You know, funny story, my oldest daughter, Kaylee, she took Spanish for a while in Texas, and she used to call me Papa Fritas. And I thought that was kind of a cool nickname. I thought it was kind of me and her had that, and it was kind of cool until one day I was watching a movie, and this guy kept saying Papa Fritas, Papa Fritas, and finally they gave him a bag of French fries, and he was happy. And I realized that the word Papa Fritas means French fry. You know, there for a while I thought that me and her had such a tight bond that we were getting close. We had some kind of intimacy. Nope, she just called me a French fry. But when I did not know what Papa Fritas meant, I thought we had some intimacy. I kind of chased a rabbit here, but let me get back to where we were. Because you have the Spirit of God in you, and you're living by the Spirit of God, you have such an intimacy with God that you can call him Daddy, Abba, Father. You have that close intimacy with him. If you're a child of God, you have that. Then he goes on to verse 16. I cannot really explain this, guys. I can't explain it. But the Spirit of God testifies with my spirit, and it tells my spirit that I am God's kid. Verse 17, Paul continues this thought. He says, if we are God's kid, then we are heirs, and we have an inheritance. We're co-heirs with Christ, and we share in the future glory with Christ, and we share also with his sufferings. What Paul says in a nutshell, so far, he says, we have the Spirit of God, which makes us God's child. Then we should start living as God's child. Stop living in sin. Okay, before we kind of digest this next part, guys, you need to get the whole picture before we kind of go verse by verse, or you'll get kind of confused, because I got confused when I was trying to look at it, and I had to read it a couple times to get the whole picture. Now, back in Genesis, you have Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, and the world became cursed. Adam and Eve and the ground were cursed until one day when Jesus Christ comes, a new world will be created, and that is not cursed. And the followers of Jesus Christ will be in this new world. So keep all this in mind as we walk through this next couple of passages. Folks, first I want to let you know I'm not an expert on these passages, so I'm going to try to give you the best what I understand. All right, verse 18. This present sufferings are living in sin in a cursed world. And this world, with all its evil, is suffering. And it does not even compare to the future glory out there one day that we'll experience as believers. In verses 19 through 21, the creation is waiting for the believers to live on this new earth. And when we get our resurrection bodies and to live in this new place created by God, waiting eagerly, expecting for the sons of God to be revealed. And that is the future. In verses 22 to 23, Paul moves into another subject matter, and he's just so smooth on how he does this. Just like the whole creation has been groaning like the pains of childbirth. And guys, I have 4 kids, and I was there every time a kid was born. And I saw a lot of pain in my wife, but there's also a lot of joy after that pain and that suffering. Now Paul takes that thought and moves into being adopted as kids into the family of God. He says, we wait eagerly. Even though it may be painful, there's an excitement. That excitement is that when we are redeemed as a child of God. So in verse 24 and 25, that is our hope. First, I want to look at how Paul defines hope. He does not define hope as a guess or as luck or a scratch on a lotto ticket. That's not how he defines hope. This is how he defines hope. He says hope is not seen. Hope is not something that you already have. Hope is something that we wait patiently for. And lastly, in Hebrews 11, it says, faith is being sure of what we hope for. Hope is faith and assurance. That is what we wait on. And secondly, Paul says hope is what saves us. We wait for Jesus Christ to come back so that we can be a part of his family, that we can be redeemed, we can be bought back, and that can be accomplished. So what does Paul tell us in Romans 8 that we can take home today? If you are a believer in Jesus Christ, then you are obligated. You're obligated to follow the Spirit of God, which means you stop feeding that sinful nature. If you have the Spirit, then you are a child of God, which means you can have intimacy with God. You can crawl up in his lap and say, Daddy. If you are following the Spirit of God, you are co-heirs with Christ, and you share in his sufferings, and you share in the future glory. We have hope, and that hope that we wait for Jesus Christ to redeem us as his children. Well, that's kind of our Sunday school lesson, but I want to spend just a few moments to tell you what's going to happen on Sunday. On Sunday, we're going to have parking lot church. So invite your friends, tell them to bring their own car and show up, and we'll have some fun. We'll worship God together. But I want to kind of share with you, I want to kind of do a new Bible series. And I've been thinking about this. When you look at people in the Bible, you have followers and you have not so followers. You have those who don't follow Christ. You have followers and those who don't follow Christ. And I want to be honest with you, I would say I would love to be those people, the heroes of the faith. But sometimes I think about that, and I really think about reality. Would I be that hero? Would I be that follower like I should? You know, remember the 12 spies? They went out to explore the promised land. And I'd like to say, you know what, I'd be one of those two that would come back and say, have the faith, and say, you know what, we need to go and take the promised land. But in reality, I may be like the other 10 and say, we can't do it. Those people are just too dang big. You know, when the entire nation of Israel turned to Baal worship, there was 7,000 faithful Israelites hid in a cave that still followed God. And there was one man named Elijah that got out and challenged him. Folks, in reality, I'm just going to be honest, I probably would not be the Elijah. I would be the guy in the cave. Or you had the 10 lepers that Jesus healed. If you remember, one of them comes back and gives thanks to Jesus. And I would love to think that I would be that one that came back, and I would love to be that one, but in reality, thinking about it, would I be that person? And I know I may be confusing you, but what I want to do the next several Sundays is I want to look at the people that did not follow Jesus. And maybe by learning why they didn't follow him, it may help us understand how to follow him even better. I hope that made sense. If not, I have till Sunday to figure that out to make it sense. But, you know, again, I'd love to see you Sunday. We have a parking spot with your name on it. Again, if you have a bigger vehicle, you can park in the back. You know, you can actually be Back Row Baptist if you want to be, our Back Row Parking Baptist. I don't know what it is, but hey, please come. Invite your friends. We'll worship together. It will still stay 6 feet apart. We'll still do what we're supposed to do, but we can still meet together and enjoy each other. I love you. Thank you. And we'll talk to you later.